Okay, welcome to Chapter 29. Chapter 29, now we're going to start getting into plants and how plants came from the water onto land. So what we are going to be talking about as far as plants go and anything goes in class is we're going to start with the most primitive and then go to the most advanced. So the most primitive types of plants that are out there are going to be what are called non-vascular plants. And obviously that means they don't have vascular tissue, which means they don't have a xylem or a phloem. So they have no way of conducting water and nutrients and stuff throughout the plant, and so they tend to be really small as a result of that. Then you've got the vascular plants, and they're more advanced, and those have a water-conducting xylem and a phloem to conduct food. Now, if we wanted to kind of group all of these into 4 separate categories, what we can do is we've got the non-vascular land plants, and that's going to be mosses, liverworts, and hornworts. So you can see here, this is a moss, and then you've got liverworts and hornworts, right? So if you look at all these, they're very small, and they're in kind of moist environments because they haven't really made that complete transition to living completely on land without being very dependent on the water. And then one of those reasons is because they're non-vascular. So those are going to be the non-vascular plants. The rest of these are going to be vascular, and then that next group is the seedless vascular plants. So what that means is that they don't produce seeds, but they do have a xylem and phloem so they can get big. So they're going to make spores instead. So in this category, you're going to have your club moss, which these guys are kind of small, and you find them on like the floor of the rainforest. Then you have ferns. There's another picture of ferns and whisk ferns, right? So those are all going to be in that category. Then the next group are going to be the gymnosperms, and those are going to be the ones that have the cone. So you've got your conifers, and you also have your cycads, which look like a palm tree, but you can see they still have that cone that they create for their seeds. And then last, you've got the angiosperms, and that's going to be anything that flowers. So angiosperms and gymnosperms are going to be way more advanced than the other two because those two are going to make seeds. Okay, so let's say you're a plant and you're going to make that transition onto land. One thing that you're going to be trying to deal with is drying out, right? That's going to be a big thing you're going to need adaptations to deal with. So plants can have a whole bunch of adaptations to deal with that. One of them is going to be what's called a cuticle. And a cuticle is going to be like a waxy coating on the leaf, and that seals in the water so that it doesn't lose a lot of water from the leaves to the air. And some of the plants, like a desert cactus or something, you can actually scratch it off with your fingernail and kind of see it. It looks like wax, and that's going to be the cuticle. Another thing that plants can have are stomata, and stomata are going to be little openings in the leaves that they can open and close to exchange gases with the environment. Because don't forget, all these plants are doing photosynthesis, and they have to exchange oxygen and CO2 with the atmosphere. So the stomata are actually going to be able to open and close to allow them to do that only when necessary. And I think I have a picture of that. Yeah. So these little openings that you see here, 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 those are all going to be stomata. This picture is actually what iceberg lettuce looks like on the surface. So that's kind of cool. All right. Now, when we go through their plant life cycle, it's going to have the same thing as those protists that we talked about in Chapter 28. So you're going to have the sporophyte making spores. That turns into the gametophyte that makes gametes. That's going to fuse and form a zygote. Like, they are going to have that same life cycle. Okay, so now what we're going to do is talk about the plants in a little bit more detail. So the first group is going to be the non-vascular land plants. And so that's the mosses, liverworts, and hornworts. So technically those are called bryophytes. They're in the phylum Bryophyta. And these guys, what's going to put them in this category is not only that they're non-vascular, but also they have to have water to reproduce successfully. So the sperm needs to actually get into water to get to the egg. And so that's why they are going to be growing in like moist locations. All right. In a little bit more detail, the gametophyte is photosynthetic. Now, if we look at the life cycle of a moss, right here, I'm going to make this bigger. Okay, the green leafy part that you're used to seeing that makes the moss look like that green fuzzy stuff that's growing on logs is going to actually be what's called a gametophyte. And what's going to happen is at the tip of the gametophyte is where you're going to find the Antheridia and Archegonia. Now, we've already talked about that in lab, and the Antheridia is going to be where the sperm is made, and then the Archegonia is where the egg is made, right? So the sperm's going to need some sort of water, like rain or, a nearby stream or something, to get that sperm to the egg in the Archegonia. Now remember, all this is happening at the top of that green leafy structure called the gametophyte. Now, once the egg is going to get fertilized, the zygote is going to start growing up from the top of that structure. And eventually it's going to turn into what's called the sporophyte. And here's a mature sporophyte growing out here. Now, what color is that sporophyte? It's brown, right? And only things that are really green, in our terms, are going to be doing photosynthesis. So this sporophyte is actually nutritionally dependent on the gametophyte down here. And so what's going to happen is the sporophyte's going to grow out. It's going to grow this little capsule. That's going to burst and release spores, and then the whole cycle starts again. So I have some other pictures here, some real moss that you could see. So here's the gametophytes of the moss. You can see the green leafy structures. And at the tips here would be where you would find the Archegonium and Antheridia. Then what's going to happen is out of those tips, the sporophyte's going to grow. So here are some sporophytes right here. And that little capsule is eventually going to burst like that, right? So you've got your gametophyte, you've got your sporophyte growing out of it, and then the spores are exploding from that capsule. So if you ever go on a hike, you can see this all the time. Like you can see moss that's just a gametophyte, and then you'll see some that are in a different life stage, and they may have a sporophyte growing out of them. All fun things to point out while you're hiking. Your friends will love you for that, or not. Okay, so we talked about the Archegonium and Antheridium. We talked about that. Liverworts are going to have the same life cycle, and so are hornworts. And just as a little important fact, hornworts are thought to be the earliest plant that actually did make that transition on a land, even before liverworts and mosses. So that's just kind of cool. The little last part here is going to be talking about the seedless vascular plants. And so seedless means obviously they don't make seeds, so they're going to make spores. And plants in general can either be what's called homosporous, which is what the seedless vascular plants are going to be, or heterosporous, which is what the seed-producing plants would be. And so homo means same, and so that means all of the spores that they make are the same. Heterosporous means they make different types of spores, and so that's how you produce a seed. We talked about the xylem, that's going to conduct water. And the phloem is going to conduct hormonal signals and also food and nutrients throughout the plant. Okay, now we're going to talk about ferns and look at their life cycle, which is a little bit different. Oh yes, there's your Archegonia and your Antheridia, which we looked at in lab. Okay, fern life cycle. Let's take a look at this. So we've got our spores. The spores are going to turn into gametophytes. And the gametophyte is going to turn into this kind of green heart-shaped structure here that you actually looked at in lab. It was called a prothallium. And what's going to happen is if you see these little bumps on top of it, that's where the Archegonia and Antheridia are going to be located. So once again, sperm is going to find its way to the egg, and once it fertilizes it and makes a zygote, it's actually going to start growing the sporophyte out. Now, what's the color of this sporophyte? It's green. So this sporophyte is not nutritionally dependent on the gametophyte. And here's a mature sporophyte here. So the dominant stage in a fern is going to be the sporophyte. Like that's the structure that we associate with a sperm. We don't associate this green floppy thing here, the gametophyte stage with a fern. So we say that the sporophyte is the dominant stage in a fern's life cycle, as opposed to a moss where the gametophyte is going to be the dominant structure in their life cycle. So that's a difference between the two of them. All right. Now, on the back of the mature sporophyte are going to be those little sori, and those are eventually going to open and release the spores, and then the whole process happens again. So that's going to be the fern life cycle. Alrighty. So as far as parts of the fern, you've got the rhizome, which is going to be an underground stem that's going to connect them all. Then you've got the frond, which is going to be that big leafy part. And finally, you're going to have the sori, which are going to be those clusters of spores that look like little dots on the underside of the frond. So that's chapter 29, pretty fast one, and that's just introducing you to a couple of types of plants. And the next ones we're going to get into the flowering plants and the cone-producing plants.